The exhibition's about television news in America. I was trying to find a way to make a piece of work about the war, the ongoing wars in the Middle East, without going there, and particularly about its effect in America. I was in the States, I'd been in the TV studio. I was very conscious that the Americans are very involved in the war, and yet they don't actually seem to report very much on their news. A lot of the work I've made has been about conflict, and particularly about how you make art that's about war without actually being at the war or involved in that. So I'm always looking for new strategies, new ways of thinking about war, and there's a real interesting correlation between the technology of contemporary warfare with drones and surveillance and the kind of high-tech technology and the technology of news and reporting of conflict. So I'm trying to bring those two ideas together in this exhibition.
Paul Seawright was born in Belfast in 1965, and he has become one of the most important and internationally acclaimed photographers who look at conflict across the globe. One of the issues that we've found having exhibitions that deal with art and conflict is that the war may end or the conflict may stop, but the legacy of those conflicts still remain, and one of the important ways in which art can help is that it can allow people to have conversations about things that can be quite difficult at the time of conflict. Artists can interpret what is actually happening in these areas of unrest across the world, and it's important that we have these artistic interpretations. And as here, Paul has actually removed the imagery of the Iraq War from the photographs. You don't see any of the horror, the war imagery that you would expect. What you see are quite, in some cases, stark, very beautifully composed images of US news stations who constructed the news about the Iraq War. So it's a very different take on what would be normally seen as artists who are commissioned to relate or to illustrate the war in different parts of the world.
It's getting harder and harder to represent contemporary warfare. I mean, if you think about what's going on even in Syria at the minute, we don't see much from on the ground. Bombs are dropped from very high level. It was the same in Afghanistan, a war that I covered for the Imperial War Museum in 2002. High level bombing, drone strikes. People are flying those vehicles not in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq, but from Portakabins in Las Vegas. So that kind of remote technology is something I'm trying to pick up through the news studio, which is a kind of an interesting way of doing that. So, where you see a cluster of lights on the floor of a studio, or a camera, a remote control camera, it's trying to kind of reference something about remote control weapons and the distance between where we are here in the West and the actual war going on in the East. There's a photograph of it's like a piece of technology. It's a camera in front of a black curtain. It's one of my favourite photographs because it's trying to make kind of some statement about remoteness and about remote control. If you go into a contemporary news studio today, there's not lots of cameramen everywhere. The cameras all move about remotely. There's a second image of these 3 cameras. It's just called machines, and these things kind of move silently around the studio. It's very ominous. But I was trying the whole time to make photographs that had that simplicity about them, that had a kind of a foreboding sense, and that black camera on a black background just summed it up for me. The kind of technological horror that you might get looking at similar technology in a war situation. Can you transfer that to the television studio? I've always, in all of my work, tried to take the violence out of the image. I've made a lot of work about conflict. I mean, a lot of work in Northern Ireland. But I think when you describe violence in a picture, it's actually not very helpful. I think we've almost become immune to looking at those kind of images. There were so many of them, certainly during the Troubles, that we find it very hard to read them or want to spend any time looking at them. So I've been always trying to find ways to make art that still talks about what goes on in those kind of difficult and violent situations without showing the violence itself. I think as conflict has become more endemic post 9/11, I mean, we've had, 3, 4, 5, quite large conflicts. It was significant anyway. It's difficult to keep people engaged with it. It's difficult to get people to still want to look at reports about what's going on in those countries. So, I think art has a place to play there, because you can engage an audience in a different way. It's a slower engagement. It's more sustained, perhaps. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, trying to say, oh, look, there's this kind of compassion fatigue in mainstream media, but maybe we can use art to come at it from a different angle, engage people and keep them interested in what's happening.
The exhibition is now open to the public and will run until April 2016.